What's going on? Boys, arm yourselves, MBTI stuff. Today we are talking a bit about breaking the dreaded dominant tertiary loop. And we're going to explain it specifically using INTPs and INFPs, TISI and FISI, but we're going to talk about this loop in general quite a bit. People act like looping your tertiary is always this miserable, irrational thing. But it isn't, and you loop in the first place because for you, it makes a lot of sense. On one level, you are hooking up your most natural, most effective strength with your natural relief, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. On another level, you are repressing your inferior function, the thing that doesn't work very well and feels like it exists solely to hurt you or to limit you. And on another level, you are bypassing your auxiliary, who is or what is an advisor, I'm realizing doesn't naturally make a lot of sense for people. Like that Sammy rally car, you're going to break the car, Sammy meme. Your auxiliary does give you good advice, it informs most of your actions, but its hands are not on the wheel, and if you try to listen to it, it can come across as yappy and nonsensical. And another thing I'm realizing is your auxiliary doesn't itself provide you any relief. That's why it's so easy to, or so natural even, to bypass it. See, looping, tertiary looping, is not in any way irrational if comfort is your end goal. And you might say, well, looping makes me miserable. Well, why don't you stop? Because not looping feels even worse. Looping is a natural, almost unconscious strategy to minimize discomfort. So, why would you want to stop looping if you know you are not going to feel better? It's so you can be better. If you spend your entire life looping, which is distinct from preferring your tertiary, because you can prefer your tertiary and still access, listen to your auxiliary and work with or on your inferior, you're going to spend your entire life like a chimpanzee with electrodes stuck in the goon center of his brain. You're going to spend your entire life spinning in circles and hitting the dopamine levers. And if that's all you want to do with your life, contrary to popular belief, you can. Nobody says some people say you need to reach higher, but you actually don't. And the people telling you you should probably won't. That's why they are spending time telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing while sitting on their asses and gooning, electrode gooning themselves. But if you have this something in you, you might recognize there is a potential you aren't reaching. There's a ledge you can see and know you could climb but aren't climbing it. And maybe that bothers you, and if it does, then breaking the loop and keeping the loop off is something you're going to need to learn to do and keep at, because loops are devious. So how do you break a loop? First step is recognizing you're in one, which is difficult, and then deciding you want to do something about it. Loops are tricky because they feel like the most effective option. They creep in. You don't choose to do these things, these are the things you find yourself doing. So for INTPs and INFPs, both sharing tertiary SI, they're going to find themselves thinking about the same shit over and over and over again. Never iterating on it, never doing anything about it, just thinking the same exact things every day. And from an outsider's point of view, you could say they are torturing themselves with this idea. And they might say the same thing. But why do they keep on doing it? Well, reality has hit them with a brick wall. The INTP thinks there is no good way to deal with people. Ergo, there is no good way to change things and make the world better. Remember, INTPs have nemesis TE. INFP realizes, I can't do shit. I can't change anything. Ergo, I can't make the world better for people. INFPs have nemesis FE. INFPs and INTPs are very good to compare each other against because they're very similar. When you get down into the shit they care about anyway, not necessarily in the ways they deal with things. They're realizing their inferior functions are not up to snuff emotionally or functionally to deal with things. At least in the way they think they need to deal with things. Dominant TI and dominant FI are very narrow, especially when young. The world needs to be 115% great yesterday, and I can't get 0%. And that is where the loop starts. The inferior function, which is typically repressed, typically weak, it's also a bit of an aspiration tied up with the nemesis function, encounters the reality that it stinks and can't do shit. And that level of helplessness is deeply distressing. So distressing, in fact, they'd rather not even deal with it. They'd rather not... It's not just laziness or cowardice. I think most types, most people, most of the time don't realize these things can be overcome at all. So it's like sticking your hand against a hot oven and then pulling it away, not realizing you can turn the oven off. I don't think people realize that's an option. That's part of the reason looping starts. You get confronted with something super painful, perhaps, or maybe one of the most painful things, and you don't realize there's anything you can do about it, so you retreat back into what naturally is most comfortable to you. And now, this is a weird contradiction. Loops are both schizophrenic and insane, but I think also they exist to keep you from losing your mind. INPs will torture themselves every day, literally repeating it to themselves, helplessness, the image of helplessness, the memory of helplessness, the feeling of helplessness every day. It looks like torture, it probably feels like torture, but it isn't. It is the image of what they felt, conceptualized into oblivion, repeated into oblivion, but it isn't exactly what they felt. And it keeps them from going back and standing before the horror of their helplessness, like a cosmic beast you can't wrap your mind around. That level of felt helplessness can break people. So I think, anyway, by looping, by telling themselves about it repeatedly, it keeps them from actually confronting it. ESPs, for instance, which is hilarious, inferior NI. There's more to this world, you know, and you are probably more keenly aware of that than most people are, specifically because you're aware of it, yet also feel separated from it. How do you deal with this mind-breaking fact you are aware of? Live, laugh, love, my dude. Do anything except think about it. So your first step in breaking your loop is to recognize that you are looping at all, and to accept that your looping is probably coming from a place of pain and confusion. Almost certainly helplessness. We didn't even get into ENTJs. You want to see devastating loops? Inferior FI and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. And then you need to decide you want to do something about your loop. Knowing that breaking the loop is confronting this pain, your confusion, your helplessness, and then at some point, however many times you try to break the loop, accepting this mind-breaking pain is not going away. It won't go away. Your inferior and nemesis functions are many things, and they are all contradictions, and the longer you live and the longer you study practical typology, the more beautiful it becomes, not to get artsy-fartsy. Your inferior and nemesis functions are that pain. It's not, the pain is not a consequence of them, it is them. Because it's knowledge. They are knowledge together. What it means to be that 1 in 100 people afflicted with this bad thing. What it means to live as someone who is helpless in this particular field. Your inbuilt weakness is a constant reminder. Whenever Joyce's Daedalus would get a little too high on his horse or his life would be going a little too well, something stinky would come around and ground him. That's what your inferior function is. And once again, part of breaking out of your loop is accepting the discomfort, the confusion, the pain, the helplessness of accepting that part of life. You aren't slaying the dragon. You are accepting the fact you have a monkey on your back, and it's heavy, and it's biting your ears, and it stinks, and it isn't going anywhere. That hurts so much worse and so much more constantly than looping does. But once you've accepted what it really means to break a loop, then you can start breaking it. And one of the very great benefits of breaking a loop is realizing after a certain point the pain hasn't gone away, but you're a lot more capable. Now that you have stopped repressing the truth that you have a monkey on your back, or complaining about it constantly, you can dedicate your time to practicing with it, not against it, not in spite of it, not to combat it, but with it, and then you're somebody who can run a 5K with a monkey on their back. You're carrying around a shit catapult. The contradiction, one of the many contradictions in your inferior function and your nemesis function, is how they tie you together perfectly in a way you wouldn't expect. Right? The TE inferior INTP thing used to be a meme however many years ago. How dangerous would an INTP be if you replaced, just swap them, two functions around right next to each other in the grand chain, FE for TE? How dangerous would that INTP be? How manipulative, controlling, masterfully controlling would an INFP be if you swap those two functions? TE for FE. ENTJs, get rid of that sobbing on the floor crying FI and swap it out with TI. How dangerous. And I think that's one of the reasons so many people talk about doing shadow work when they aren't even doing conscious, normal cognitive function stacks work. If you felt you needed, if you were trying to recreate this TE inferior INTP meme in real life by doing shadow work, you're missing the picture. Your inferior function doesn't hold you back and make you weak. It feels that way. Your inferior function instead ties all of your conscious functions together better because of that weakness, not in spite of it. Your inferior and nemesis functions are your forever pain functions, forever weakness functions, forever helplessness functions. They are also your masterpiece functions. I'm having a hard time describing it, but they make everything work together exactly the way they're supposed to work together once you accept that pain for what it is. And once again, I reiterate, I stress, that does not feel good. It is never going to feel good. But it turns you into such a supple machine. Opposed to the rigidness, the rigid thing, vulnerable thing, because of its rigidness, you would be if you swapped your inferior and nemesis functions. You wouldn't be strong. Nothing would work in concert. For 1 month, you would feel invulnerable and probably not human, and then fall apart. Your weakness is your soul, and that hurts. Well, it just hurts, but it also makes you so much more capable once you embrace it. Stop hiding from the discomfort of your existence. So step 2, breaking the loop. You engage your auxiliary. You do not just let it advise. Because even while you were looping, it was advising. You were just choosing not to listen to it. Now you are doing more than listening to it. Now, as much as you can, as bad as it feels, as stupid as it feels, and it will feel awful and stupid, let your auxiliary make decisions the way your dominant function would make decisions. And it's going to feel stupid and uncomfortable, because, specifically stupid and uncomfortable, those two words, because your auxiliary function is going to contrast in its expression against your greatest strength and your greatest comfort. So I'm an INTP. My auxiliary function is NE. That's an extroverted function. My greatest strength and my greatest comfort are both introverted functions. Had to think about that one for a second. This is not the field you are good at or comfortable with. And by going into this field, you are going to be, for now, lightly brushing the balls of your inferior function. Not hitting it straight yet, but getting a little close for comfort. And you do this as much or as long as you can bear it. You build up a tolerance for it. And the reason you're doing this, I think, is you're building up faith in your auxiliary function. And not just faith in that it can do things, but faith in that it does accomplish things. You need to do it for a while, because I think people don't have the confidence their auxiliary function can do anything independently. How do you trust something's advice if you've never seen it really work? I think most people's auxiliary function is, to them, a curiosity. Something that spices up their personality but does nothing substantial. Because you don't know it can do something substantial, because you haven't figured out what your inferior function means, how it works, yet, and you've been looping for however long, however many months, however many years. On the grand life scale, you haven't given your auxiliary enough time to work enough to prove itself to you. So, it's going to feel stupid, it's going to feel uncomfortable. Listen to your auxiliary for a while, as much as you can. Do what it says, be safe, but embrace the discomfort. Embrace the fact you are in a situation operating in a realm or with tools you are not comfortable with. The discomfort is what you're looking for. And we mentioned expression earlier. Introverted expression or extroverted expression, the way your functions act themselves out. You don't need to try to coax your inferior function out or to work on it specifically. If you engage your auxiliary enough, long enough, and seriously enough, earnestly, you're going to be in the same realm as your inferior function. So if you are an INP, you are going to be in the extroverted realm using your auxiliary, but with your inferior there. Same for introverted auxiliaries. You go inside with your auxiliary, you're going to encounter naturally your inferior. You don't have to do anything. Just be uncomfortable in this space, and your inferior will come out. And I am not going to try to discourage you from trying to work on your inferior directly, but I will say I've never really needed to work on mine that hard, or I haven't, once I started engaging my auxiliary, putting myself in that extroverted sphere more often. Another thing that's difficult to describe, but it's like your functions start working together. Instead of your three first functions all ganging up on your inferior. Your inferior recognizes its skills, however minimal, are needed, so it shows up and helps, and then in kind, your other functions start helping your inferior function. And that's when you really start cooking. Because at this point, once your inferior function is at the table and all your functions are at least trying to work in concert, the loop is broken. And you probably would need someone to tell you that the loop is broken because it doesn't feel like it's broken. All you're feeling is stress and pain. Considering those feelings, you might not have the time or attention to recognize that you are no longer stagnating, you're becoming someone different, you're becoming someone more effective, and this thing that bothered you so much, and will continue to bother you the rest of your life, you are at least engaging with. It's not going to be happy. It is not designed to be happy. There isn't a happy ending here. But you are at the table, and the thing you thought was hurting you, you have realized is on your side. It just hurts, feels like it hurts, and does hurt, because that is the avenue you feel the evil of the world the most. Right, so if you're an INTP, difficulties with people are going to hurt you badly. And I don't think that's ever going to go away, but that's not FE's fault. You're an INFP, you feel powerless. The world is designed to make you feel powerless. That's not TE's fault. In fact, FE and TE, these avenues for hurt, they're all... Typology is really beautiful if you can get out of the pop psychology bullshit and step into the, coincidentally, Jungian mystical realm. These avenues of hurt are through which hurt comes in, through which you are made aware of how awful the world is also the avenue through which you can express your response to whatever that worldly evil is. I think I work in nonprofits. Who are the people I find come into my office wanting to help most? Elderly TE DOMs who now want to save the world. And I say that mockingly But, well, there isn't a nice way to say that. 65, perfect time to try to save the world. Especially when you still aren't really committed to it. Because that is really uncomfortable, and you got to retirement age unable to deal with the most uncomfortable aspects of your life. Regardless, the FI inferiors, after it's already way too late and they never trained themselves to commit to things that are deeply uncomfortable, that is the avenue through which they want to effect change on the world. Versus INFPs. They want to go out and make these big changes when looking at them they appear to be the least changey people. This all to say, you have broken the loop at this point. You have never felt worse. You feel like you're dying. You have also never been better. And then step 3, because breaking the loop is not the last step. You thought it was just something you do once and then you're good. You're going to need to break yourself out of loops so many times in your life. Step 3 is like the maintenance stage in therapy. You stay vigilant. Are you falling back into a loop? Why are you falling back into a loop if you are? Do you plan on doing something about it? How did this happen at all? Because loops are tricky. You really don't want to feel bad. So between the bad or worse option, you are naturally, unconsciously going to lean into bad instead of worse. That's how you end up back in loops, and you are always going to do that. So if loops bother you, you need always to be vigilant. You can't let yourself get comfortable. And if that all sounds too stressful, if that's all too much, nobody is saying you have to. Nobody's saying you have to do all this, and I mean that. Anyone who says you must do this or that just to be more effective, because you aren't really going to change anything. That's the pain of it. That's one of the great pains of life, I think, is recognizing that you really aren't going to change anything. At least not in any way you are going to see or be rewarded for. Never going to feel comfortable for. You don't have to do anything. I completely understand choosing bad instead of worse. You have one life. Why would you want to hurt more knowing it isn't going to amount to anything? So, fuck 'em. You do what you need to do. But that is loops, some thoughts on them, how they tie into life at large, and how to break out of them if you are stupid enough to want to. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.